And we begin with that major news this morning out of China, this high-stakes meeting between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Chinese President Xi Jinping.
It's part of the second and final day of a critical diplomatic mission aimed at cooling relations between the world's two largest economies and rival military powers. During the meeting, Secretary Blinken said the U.S. and China have an obligation to responsibly manage their relationship and that the U.S. was committed to doing so, with both sides saying that talks have been candid and in-depth. Blinken is the first Secretary of State to visit China in 5 years, and he's the highest-ranking government official to visit the country since President Biden took office. The meeting comes after his February trip to China was postponed after a suspected Chinese spy balloon flew across U.S. airspace before being shot down by U.S. authorities just off the South Carolina coast. For more, we're joined by NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley. Matt, good morning. Thanks for being with us today. This meeting with President Xi was seen as key to the trip's success, but it wasn't confirmed by either side until shortly before it was scheduled to begin. So how did this all come together, and what can you tell us about this meeting?
Yeah, it was kind of a last-minute thing. And, the thing is that when we're talking about these two leaders, this was a trip that had been scheduled where we saw Antony Blinken, who was going to be meeting with his counterpart and with the top foreign policy advisor to the Chinese Communist Party. Those were two key meetings. They happened already. They lasted for hours. But that meeting with President Xi, that just wrapped up. Now, how we got to that, we don't have a lot of the background reporting on where that went. But this is a long time coming. This is months in the making. You mentioned back in February, that original meeting had been postponed because of that Chinese spy balloon that we devoted tons of coverage to. It was a really wild episode and one that just poisoned the water between these two leading global countries. And now it looks like what we're seeing is something like a détente. We don't know what was discussed or if there was any deliverables or if anything was actually agreed upon. But the important thing about this meeting is that it happened at all. And that's just what we saw, that there is still room for dialogue. Both parties are still willing to come to the table, and this could lead to higher level meetings, including between Biden and Xi themselves in China. Guys.
So, Matt, look, this, as we've been talking about here, you just touched on many of these things, but this comes amid such high tensions from that spy balloon, but then also to Taiwan, human rights issues, the war in Ukraine, a whole myriad of things. And so not a lot was necessarily expected to come from this, no real substantive change or anything like that. But we are hearing a little bit of reaction that we don't know details, just kind of commentary from both sides about this visit. What do we know at this point about what they're saying happened?
Yeah, both sides are, releasing statements saying that they were talking in terms that really just sound like very sort of academic, almost ideological terms, sort of a clash of civilization, the responsibility that both leaders have, not just to their own publics in China and the United States, but to the entire world to de-escalate, or as the U.S. would call it, to defang the relationship between Beijing and Washington. That looks like it could have been successful because what we're seeing right now in terms of the sort of competing statements or dueling statements out of this meeting, it looks as though both of them were really committed to trying to just lower the temperature between Beijing and Washington. And that's going to be crucial, again, not just to both countries, but to allies and enemies throughout the entire world who really are closely watching this relationship because it does have knock-on effects for relationships and for other interactions internationally on the global stage throughout the entire world. So that's what makes this so crucial. But again, this meeting just wrapped up. It just happened. We don't know what was discussed really in detail, but there's going to be a lot of eyeballs and everybody's going to be listening to what was said. And again, the important thing was just that this happened at all.
Absolutely. Guys. A lot of details to still learn here. Matt Bradley, thank you for kicking us off this morning.
Staying in Washington, the hypothetical question of whether former President Trump should be pardoned if he's convicted in the classified documents case is dividing the 2024 Republican field. Meet the Press moderator Chuck Todd had Trump's former vice president and presidential hopeful Mike Pence weigh in on all of this. Here's Chuck.
Well, hello there, Savannah and Valerie. This week on Meet the Press, former Vice President and current Republican presidential candidate Mike Pence joined me to discuss the former president's indictment in the classified documents case. Would Trump's former vice president pardon him if convicted? Take a look at what he had to say.
I just think the question is premature. Honestly, Chuck, I've pardoned people who were found guilty of a crime.
What is your bar? What was your bar for a pardon?
Well, let me say first and foremost, I don't know why some of my competitors in the Republican primary presume the president will be found guilty. Look, all we know is what the president has been accused of in the indictment. We don't know what his defense is. we don't know if this will even go to trial. So I think, look, the President of the United States takes an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And as I said in my announcement, I'll always choose the Constitution. But the oath the President takes also requires him to see that the laws are faithfully executed. That means respecting the Article III courts in this country. I think we need to let the courts do their job and let this case work its way through our judicial system.
If you were President Biden, would you pardon him right now?
I just think this whole matter is incredibly divisive for the country. Look, I just think at the end of the day, it is saddening to me that we are now in this moment.
You can see a lot more of my interview with Mike Pence at meetthepress.com. You can get the full unedited version and other clips. You can also get a lot more of Meet the Press right here on NBC News Now, every single weekday at 4 p.m. Eastern.
Chuck, thanks so much.
Well, this morning, the 2024 presidential election is ramping up. President Biden will be back on the re-election campaign trail today, heading to California for a rally. Over the weekend, he held one of his first big campaign events since launching his re-election bid, touting his accomplishments at a rally of union organizers in Philadelphia.
We've created 13 million new jobs since I became president. That's more jobs in a little over 2 years than any president created in one 4-year term.
For more, we're joined by NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray. Mark, good morning. Thank you for joining us on this holiday morning. So tell us, what was the president's message to supporters this weekend?
Yeah, Savannah, as you actually heard right there, it was touting his economic and legislative accomplishments, all in battleground Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, where he was getting the endorsement from the AFL-CIO all more than a year before the general election. But you're seeing President Biden, now that he has opened up his campaign, to kind of restart all of that energy and momentum heading into 2024. Savannah, another message was that he was contrasting his economic vision with Republicans, saying that he wants a fair tax system and wants to tax the rich, while Republicans want to maintain tax cuts for the wealthiest of Americans.
So, Mark, as we mentioned, I mean, this is kind of one of the first big stops we've seen the president make on the campaign, even though this is about 2 months after he announced his plans to seek that re-election. What is the strategy here? What do you think we're going to see going forward in terms of how the White House focuses their energy?
Yeah, it's still mostly a Rose Garden strategy, where he is going to do mostly official events and keep the campaign off to the side. It's important to note that that rally to union supporters in Philadelphia wasn't really even paid for by the Biden campaign. It was a event where he ended up stopping. It was an actual union event where he ended up giving a rally. But we're probably not going to end up seeing the Joe Biden for president campaign stops for another year or so, as the White House continues to focus on its business at hand. And in fact, today he's actually headed to California to speak about the environment, climate change, and energy jobs, but also raise money for his campaign.
Absolutely. Mark, quickly, I do want to ask you about the other side of things here. The president, as he's promoting his economic message, his Republican rivals over on the other side, taking aim at his predecessor, of course, the current GOP frontrunner, that's former President Trump. And we're seeing this sort of delicate balance of them separating themselves after this indictment, but then also not wanting to alienate Trump's base of supporters and go after it too hard. What are we hearing? What's the latest here on how people are towing that line?
Yeah, it's important to note that we've now seen about 6 good polls taken since Donald Trump's indictment, and all show him with significant leads over his Republican competition. And when you are the front runner, you often end up getting attacked. Although the ones that we ended up seeing from the campaign trail some were very direct attacks and some were indirect. Take a listen to some of the attacks that Donald Trump ended up taking.
Donald Trump's position on the national debt is identical to Joe Biden's.
This guy is the worst manager in the history of the American presidency.
I think that he should drop out. Clearly, he's not going to. This is going to be decided by the voters.
We've developed a culture of losing in this party where we've had 3 successive elections with substandard results.
So Ron DeSantis didn't actually attack Donald Trump by name. He decried this culture of losing, and that was different from some of the other attacks that we heard from the Republicans as the Florida governor decides really not to go right at the former president of the United States.
Something we will certainly keep an eye on. Mark Murray, thank you very much.
From hailstorms and severe flooding in the southeast to a record-breaking heat wave in Texas, Mississippi, and Louisiana, millions of Americans are dealing with severe weather conditions. NBC News correspondent Priscilla Thompson is in Perryton, Texas, one of the hardest-hit areas, with more.
Well, Valerie, good morning. As you can see, residents here in Perrytown are still digging through the destruction after that EF3 tornado bore down so quickly and so powerfully last week that officials here weren't even able to sound the alarms and warn people. And this is the kind of devastation that we're seeing in other parts of the South as well. Overnight, there were tornadoes that swept through Mississippi, and today there are some 12 million people who are at risk for severe weather, including heavy rain, flooding, hail, and so certainly a lot of concern about that. And that comes after a weekend of bad weather, of rain, of more tornadoes, including here in Perryton. It actually stopped some of the cleanup efforts here because of that heavy rain that they were getting. And in addition to those intense storms, we're also seeing a lot of heat picking up here in the South. You have 31 million people in Texas and Louisiana who are under heat advisories this week. We're expecting triple-digit temperatures, record-breaking temperatures, and certainly just an incredibly difficult week when it comes to weather for the South after a weekend and last week of more intense weather. But I will tell you something here in Perryton, they are getting power restored. There are only around 400 residents without power in this county right now. And everywhere we go, we see people who are helping with those cleanup efforts. There are barbecue pits set up just about on every other block, offering folks free food. And so communities really coming together in this time to help each other out as they try to get through this season of bad weather right now. Valerie?
All right, just some devastating pictures there. Priscilla Thompson, thanks so much.
So where are the storms headed today? Let's get a check on your Morning News Now weather.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman is here with us. Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning to you both. Great to see you. And yeah, we're still continuing to track severe weather, those dangerous temperatures in the south. So really a repeat performance of what we saw last week. We're already active on radar this morning. We've been watching this for hours. You can see really heavy rainfall. That's going to be part of it, too. We also have a tornado watch that is in the pink box. We have warnings as well. So really active starting out this morning. Normally it takes that daytime heating to get things going, but we're already starting this morning. This is a setup. We have a frontal boundary that's sort of parked over the area, or at least moving very, very slowly. It's lingering over the Tennessee Valley. It's bringing those severe storms likely along the Gulf Coast. And in addition to that, we could see up to 3-5 inches of rain. So that's going to lead to some flash flooding as well. Then look what happens tomorrow. It sinks slowly to the south, but not very fast. We're looking at training storms leading to localized flooding and also looking at 2 inches per hour. So as we go throughout time here, we're going to continue to track those storms. We're looking at severe weather threat once again today. I think this is like the 7th or 8th day in a row where we have the threat for severe storms. And we could see winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. Could see some hail and also the chance of a few tornadoes. Watching that very closely. 12 million people at risk. Also looking at some really heavy rainfall, especially in portions of the Gulf Coast. And we do have flood alerts. We have a flood watch that is in the green throughout portions of Mississippi and also Alabama. But where you see that flood warning, that's in the darker red. That means flooding is happening right now or it's imminent. Look at all that rainfall that we're expecting through Wednesday, locally 5 inches or greater. We're already saturated. We've been seeing that rain in days. And then we'll stop here because we're looking at millions under this heat alert. We're looking at heat advisories, heat warnings, temperatures in the triple digits. It's going to feel like 110 to 120 in spots.
Wow.
120.
I know. Oh, my goodness.
And it's been days. That's where it gets really tough.
Yeah, absolutely. And dangerous, right? All right, Michelle, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.